So as we continue the narrative, we've asked two questions. Why Abraham and why Israel? Paul makes a remarkable statement in his letter to the Corinthians. Let me tell you what he says. He says, these things happened to them. Now let's set the stage in the context. These things, the exodus of the people of Israel out of Egypt, happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. In other words, what Paul is saying, Paul is looking back historically at his forefathers. He said our forefathers, they all ate from the same manna, they drank from the same rock, and then he says the rock was Christ. He's understanding that the story of Israel was a progressive unveiling of an unseen realm, the kingdom realm that Jesus would talk about. One of the things that we often do today is we get the geopolitical and the seen realm mixed up with the unseen realm. That's why when Jesus was before Pilate, it didn't make any sense. Pilate was asking him a question, are you a king? He says, I'm a king, but you know anything about the kingdom that I'm from? And they were misstepping. Jesus was talking about the unseen very often, and they thought he was talking about the seen. And so what Israel allows us to do is it gives us a template in the unfolding progress. Because you got to understand, once you get past Genesis and the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy that we talked about, once you get past that, you get into the story of Israel. You get into the prophets that came from Israel. You get everything is about Israel until finally you get to the cutoff time of Malachi, say 350 or so years before the time of Jesus. And then many Jewish people have in their mind, then the story stops. And then these Gentiles pick up a story, and out of nowhere, they begin to come up with their own myths about Jesus doing all these various things. And that has nothing to do with us as Jews. And yet Paul, as a Jew, looked back historically and said all of these things were written to uncover for us a template by which we walk. Let me give you an example. Egypt was a type of the world. Pharaoh was a type of Satan. The children of Israel were a type of all those who would follow Jesus, Moses being a type of Christ. And so they were called out of Egypt, and where did they go? They went through their baptism, and the Bible's very clear. Paul says, and they were baptized into Moses and in the sea. So they were baptized Moses led them through their baptism. They went into the wilderness, which gives us a type and an understanding that when we first come to Jesus and we get baptized, we don't go immediately into the promised land. We go into the wilderness, a place where we can learn to relate to God and understand what God's about. These are the stories of Israel. And so when we go back and say, well, I don't understand the Old Testament, that's just a bunch of old stories. We want to get to the good stuff. To understand the unseen realm that we walk in, to be able to be effective at sharing the gospel, to be effective in the kingdom of God, which is an unseen realm, it's incumbent upon us to be able to understand the template that is there for us. And it's part of the story. It's part of the progressive unveiling. So I think if you can get this structure in your mind, first two chapters, fall, narrative begins. How's God going to do it? He's going to do it. And then he brings Abraham on the scene. He's going to use a people to give us, not only to bring in the Messiah in a physical sense, but he's also going to use Israel as a spiritual template by which we can understand how to walk and understand Jesus. And then Jesus comes, and then we progress to the New Testament, and the narrative continues until we get to the final two. So hopefully this is beginning to fill in some of the gaps for us to understand why the Bible, what's the structure of the Bible, and not just see it, know a few verses, a few refrigerator verses is what I like to call them, and then just hopefully we can throw those verses out and somebody gets saved, but an ability to tell the story, to begin to fill in the blanks. Hope that helps.